You know what's missing from most actual MMO games? Other than physically fit people? The actual game aspect. Is it just me, or does nearly every MMO have some kind of emphasis on a generic story, with you being the focused, unique individual despite this being a multiplayer experience? And the gameplay is always some kind of shit adventure, which somehow involves killing 10 woodland creatures that clinically spawn in the same location, and that somehow progresses the story. Well, the answer to my rhetorical question is yes, because it's rhetorical. So thank the developers for getting it right with FireFall. If you haven't noticed from that rather negative intro, FireFall is yet another free-to-play MMO by Red 5 Studios. And this time it's actually an interesting game and coincidentally is a shooter sci-fi. I'm just saying is all. For a start, instead of it being a shit clickathon for math-loving nerds, the gameplay is actually more involving and actually requires skill, and there's actual game involved within this game. It's something I'm really glad for because it's extremely refreshing for me. The combat system actually has some forms of hit detection, meaning you actually have to aim and strafe around like a normal shooter, giving you some options to be either in the first or third person, whichever is your preference. Combat-wise, there's plenty of weapons to choose from, and many different abilities to choose from, having up to 5 at a time, giving you lots of options in a tough situation. There's also 5 different playstyles to choose from, ranging from your long-range snipers that hide in the bushes, staring at people through their telescopes, the technicians building sentries and dressing like a lazy gimp, and the standard homoerotic man-tanks. Here it's probably worth noting that you're not actually forced to stick to one of these like you would in any other shit MMO. At any time you want, you can switch between classes and play in a different style, so you're not stuck to the same gameplay that will inevitably become boring after a while. Of course this is an MMO, so how does the multiplayer crap fare? Well, surprisingly, for me, rather well. Instead of following a set questline that just involves you, but everyone else happens to have, and basically being a single player game with other players twatting around, FireFall actually has players interact with each other as a team in random events without having to organise a group of nerds together, so you actually have a real sense of unity and like you're actually part of something, in turn making things a much more memorable experience. Of course, like any other MMO, you have a variety of PvP multiplayer games to choose from, pretty much making them the same as Halo's multiplayer, only this isn't filled with 14-year-old kids with ADD. However, the lack of narrative just gives it a lack of focus and endgame to work towards. They'll probably patch that at some point, but for the meantime, it's okay with all these random events that will keep you entertained as you explore the world. Getting around the world is also a fucking blast too. Because fast travel is for dull virgins afraid of exploring the world, you can rest your genitals by travelling around in Tron-style motorbikes that actually look rather comfy, and actually allow for some races to take place. So there is PvP that doesn't involve brutally murdering your fellow man for once. However, actually getting your hands on one of these bikes is something rather difficult because it involves needless grinding to work towards it. There probably was a tutorial for it at some stage, but it bugged out for me halfway through the tutorials, so I'll never know. However, no fear if you're a lazy bastard so much as myself, because exploration and travel is still fun. For once in a sandbox game, for the first time since GTA San Andreas, you can get around fields and mountains by flying around on a jetpack, which will allow you to jump out of range of enemies in combat, or even better, jump around towns and look like a bouncing prick. You can also get your kicks off by flying around on a laser glider at Mach speed, which gives you a great sense of perspective over the world, and a scenic view well worth procrastinating for. So concerning land and air, you'd expect there to be a great level of detail within the seas, allowing you to explore Great Barrier Reefs or even underwater caves, allowing much more detail that's in more so than in most MMOs, and guess... Oh. It's a note from the game. Let's open it up and see what's inside. I'm not sure if this is actually a programmed thing or the game's just bugged up the arse, but every time you go near water, your character acts like they've got rabies, and their health immediately drains as soon as they touch more than a foot deep of water, like they're drinking radioactive acid or something. If you haven't noticed through all of this padding, even for a beta game, FireFall is extremely glitchy. Other than the game sneakily crashing during a loading screen and genuinely being a pain in the ass to install, it's been near enough impossible for me to play the game ever since the last patch. Whenever I log in, my character always spins around and does a little jig, on his own like he's got two drunk brains telling him what to do. He's also managed to contract the powers of teleportation through sheer lag, and he always jumps around the place, despite the fact that I actually have a rather secure internet connection. I guess this is a problem with all MMOs and other online games, and it's something that I'm noticing more and more lately. With money-thirsty corporations changing the bandwidths to people's modems, it's becoming harder and harder for me, and even anyone else I know, to find a secure connection to a game that doesn't lag itself to death. And this is really something that can make or break an MMO. All in all, FireFall has real potential to be a generally enjoyable game that's accessible for all kinds of gamers that don't instantly froth at the mouth at the sight of a detailed iron sight covered in blood. The controller support means that I can play it whilst drunk and lying down, which, in the case of me, is pretty much all of the time. And the fact that the gameplay actually involves skill is a big bonus, as well as there actually being team play that's very easy to access, that really separates it from most MMOs. So FireFall is a generally enjoyable game, and it really has the potential to be so once they get rid of that fucking lag.